Hey everybody, welcome back to Psychedelics Today. This is Joe Moore coming at you from Breckenridge, Colorado. Today on the show, we have Brom Rector, founder of Empath Ventures, an LA-based venture firm in the psychedelic space, doing really cool stuff. Brom also has a podcast, and we'll talk about that in the show. So this is a fun one. We go all over the map, get a little cynical, and talk about people breaking laws quite publicly, how interesting that is, and what that means for the psychedelic movement, and all sorts of other fun stuff. So hope you enjoy this podcast with Brom. Brom is great. We actually got to record this in Brom's home studio, which is really cool. So in Los Angeles in the Arts District, it was really fun. So Brom, thanks for having me there, and thanks for recording with us. All right, everybody, I think you're going to like this one. And on with the podcast. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in. Here we are, Psychedelics Today. We are in the headquarters of Empath Ventures at Brom Rector. Brom, how you doing?
Hey, man, I'm good. Headquarters / my apartment, you know.
This is awesome.
All Thank you.
Yeah,
welcome to LA.
Yeah, man, I'm psyched. I'm starting to slowly fall in love with the city, maybe quickly.
Yeah.
Do you know Robert Anton Wilson? Have you heard of this guy?
I do not know.
He was really good friends with Tim Leary, former editor at Playboy. He was doing like a lot of the drug content, like when stuff was coming up. And he used to live here, and he, I think, settled in the Bay. He's like, the first few days you're in Los Angeles, it feels like heaven. And a few days later, it feels like hell.
I haven't.
Not exactly.
I haven't started feeling the hell-ish part yet. You know, it's still pretty good.
That's probably early 90s.
Yeah. The pandemic part can still was a bit hellish, but overall it's good. Yeah.
Yeah. So he's worth reading if you haven't checked him out yet. He's an incredible thinker. I think one of the more important psychedelic thinkers.
Yeah.
But all right, let's get into it. So I like to start a little bit with like who you are, but let's start with Empath first. Like, what is Empath Ventures?
Empath Ventures is a venture capital fund that invests in psychedelic medicine companies. And it's just me. It's my, fund that I started by myself. Don't have any partners or anything, although I do have some amazing advisors that I work with. And yeah, we invest in the biotech stuff that you hear about a lot, but we also invest in some of the other more weirder parts, like software that makes music for psychedelic therapy. And we invested in like a center in Mexico that does ibogaine treatments to get people off of opioids. So we're kind of like trying to branch out from a lot of just the pure biotech stuff that a lot of the psychedelics companies
You've got to hedge a little bit, right? Biotech's so risky.
Yeah. And I also, we can talk about it later, but I think that the idea that like everyone in the world is going to use some novel psychedelic molecule versus mushrooms or MDMA or ketamine or LSD is kind of crazy.
Can't wait to get into that.
You know what I mean?
Can't wait to get into that.
It's not that it won't happen. Like I'm sure some of the stuff will, but it seems insane to think that's the only outcome.
Yeah. Like if LSD is $3 and, Compass 4526 is $10,000, what am I buying?
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah.
So I started Empath in September of last year, so still pretty new. We're a very small fund compared to a lot of the other ones. I didn't have a background raising money or anything, so I kind of came to this fresh. I had an investment background, but I was never a guy out there like raising money. So that learning how to do that was all new to me. And, still trying to figure that out. We're still raising the fund, so it's not even complete yet. But we've been writing smaller checks, and we've invested in 10 companies so far. So, things are moving. And now just got to raise the rest of the money and find a bunch of cool companies to put the money into.
There it is. I think it's a cool model, right? Like, because you're independent. You can be an independent thinker. Right. You can, you're not beholden to whatever the, thesis at Goldman Sachs is or whatever that is if you're doing like a thing there. And you can think for yourself and like help advise. And it's awesome.
But no, everything is good. And, I have the podcast as well, which you've been on, which was awesome. And
what's the name of it?
I'm trying to change the name. It's called The Integration Conversation, but everyone forgets that, or they don't know what integration is. And so I have to explain it, and it's like too much. So I'm trying to figure out a new name. But I actually so I was working at like a hedge fund. I did that for most of my 20s.
What kind of work there?
I have a background in both finance and software engineering and data science. So I was doing like what they call quantitative research, where I was making like machine learning models to try and predict like
Lord.
Yeah. I was making machine learning models that would predict like the global equity indexes of like the US versus Japan or whatever, like sovereign debt versus like currencies and stuff. It was like this weird, like global macro type stuff. And, I had been doing psychedelics, since I was in my early 20s as well. So, every couple times a year I would, do some mushrooms or LSD or whatever. It was always kind of a
long
big
walks
part
on the
of
beach.
my long walks on the beach. Yeah. All that stuff, but really just burnt out and got bored of the hedge fund thing and was like, I'm not really adding any value to the world here. Like, maybe want to do something new. So in 2020, right when like the pandemic was kind of at its peak, I just decided to quit the job. I was turning 30 in a month and I was like, do I want to keep doing, a big part of it was like, do I want to keep doing this thing that I've been doing in my 20s and my 30s? And I was like, no, I got to leave before I turn 30. So I left without a plan, honestly. Like if you had said, are you going to start a psychedelic medicine fund? I'd be like, what the fuck are you even talking about? Like, no, that wasn't even like on the table. But in 2020, that was when the first couple psychedelic like IPOs happened. That's when Compass IPO'd. That's when all these like weird, questionable Canadian companies showed up on like the Neo Exchange and stuff. And I remember I was seeing all this stuff and I was like, this is insane that there are like stocks that you can buy that are related to psychedelics. Even though I had been doing psychedelics for like 10 years, I would have never predicted that they were going to be legit, like above ground businesses in psychedelics. Yeah. I just thought it was going to be underground forever. And so of course, like being a, sort of cynical hedge fund guy, my first thought was, well, this is obviously like a scam. These are like these Canadian companies are just like trying to like fleece money out of retail investors. And it turns out I was actually correct largely, but that doesn't mean that there aren't legitimate business opportunities in the psychedelics industry. But I wanted to understand what was happening in the psychedelics world. So I started a podcast and I interviewed like a lot of the founders and investors and stuff in the psychedelics world. It was like the only podcast at the time really that was focused specifically on like the business angle of psychedelics. And I was running the podcast still with no idea what I was going to do professionally. And I started getting emails from people that listen to the podcast that were like, hey, I've got $100,000. I want to invest in psychedelics. Like, what do you think I should do with it? It seems like you know what you're talking about.
Whoa.
And I also got emails from startups that were saying, hey, we all listen to your podcast. Could you like help promote our company or help us raise money because you have this platform? And I was like, oh, I've basically, without intending to, created potential investors and potential investment opportunities like coming to me, basically.
Well, Pablo was saying something like when you started, you're kind of like reading prospectuses, like
I did
in
that
real
too.
time,
Yeah,
like commenting on stuff.
The first 10 episodes there were no guests. I was literally just like reading the financial prospectuses, the S1s and everything about these companies and just like kind of talking shit about them. Yeah. Anyway, so I started off doing that, then did the interview thing and eventually realized that there was the potential to do a fund. So I kind of did, I did it backwards. Like usually you get like a bunch of guys that are finance guys and they start a fund and they're like, we need to be personable. So let's start a podcast, we need to create content.
The PR firm tells them they have to be, and so I'm not in mining anymore.
Right. But for me, I was like, I'm just going to do this podcast because it's fun. And then the fund kind of came later. And so now I'm still trying to do the podcast, although it's a lot to do both the fund and the podcast. But yeah, so here we are investing in companies and it's been cool, man. Learned a lot of stuff, found some cool companies, found some crazy companies. And now we're in this weird point in the industry where like things are crunching down and a lot of companies are going out of business. Companies are merging. It seems like we went from like hype to, there's always like these extremes where it's like overhyped, over skeptical. It seems like now we're in this like over skeptical phase. So I don't know. Do you feel that too?
Totally. Yeah. Like, I'm very bullish, but I'm also skeptical. It's like, novel molecules are going to have to be so much better, so much better. And I don't know, like, how much can you improve on LSD? Like, if you could make it 3 hours, that's pretty cool. But is that an improvement?
Yeah.
I don't know.
I think the most like, and I love like the novel molecule story. It is
totally
crazy.
It's super cool.
It is crazy to me that all this shit that we do, LSD, ketamine, MDMA, was invented so long ago. Before.
It's going to tell us so much about neurophysiology, like the way the psyche and the body works. Like we're going to learn a lot more. Like maybe it's not therapeutic ends. Maybe we're just going to learn a lot more about the human organism.
Yeah, and like applying the things that we've learned since Albert Hoffman created LSD, like modern drug discovery techniques, modern neuroscience knowledge, to the discovery and trials of new psychedelics. It's super exciting, and like the tech future-y optimist version of me that likes the idea of just progress and experimentation at all costs loves it. But it's also like mushrooms have been around for like 2,000 years. In business, you generally need, in order to succeed, you need to like improve on something. And usually not just an incremental improvement either. You need to make like a big improvement. Otherwise, no one really cares. So can you even imagine what like a 10x improvement over psilocybin would be? I can't really imagine.
Especially when like the mushrooms is the manufacture method. Like
right.
At Wonderland, I was talking to some Canadian investors, and they're saying, and I've said this on the podcast a million times, like 50-gallon garbage bags full of mushrooms, less than $1,
right?
Because the market was so saturated from, I think, cannabis legalization.
Yeah. So the production is so cheap. It's not involving like petrochemicals that, release these harmful things into the environment and everything. I think the novel molecules, like the biggest kind of upside there will be like specifically targeted to like certain indications, maybe like not the neuropsychiatric stuff like anxiety and depression. Maybe regular psychedelics will continue to kind of reign supreme there. I hear a lot of people talking about the concern around psilocybin's agonization of the 5-HT2B receptor. Have you like heard about this at all?
Kills me. Where are you at with it?
Well, see, this, I don't know. And I've heard conflicting reports.
Like, shouldn't we have seen a good amount of data at this point, given how much LSD and mushrooms are being consumed in the 60s and 70s?
Yeah, you would think so, but I think it's like the argument that I've heard from the other side says it's not like you consume it and then you would die that day. It's like you would consume it.
Yeah. Well, those people are 80
build up.
now.
It's almost like with smoking a cigarette. Like it doesn't kill you then, right? It's like it kills you like 40 years later. And it would be impossible to tell if the reason that your heart valves were like failing was because you did LSD 40 years ago, right? So I think it's sort of like absence of evidence is not the same thing as like evidence of absence, right?
But convince me is
right.
like,
well, I can't.
No, not you, but like the people out there that are like, psychedelics are dangerous. I'm like, I know 2 older former deadhead like hippies that probably consumed a lot. One died from COVID, and the other one was some sort of bone marrow cancer. Certainly not heart related stuff. Sure. And I know a lot of deadhead old men.
And obviously this is, small sample sizes.
Totally.
But look at like Shulgin. That dude lived until he was what? Pretty old.
90 somethings. Yeah. Amanda Fielding is super old. Like, and she used to consume a lot of LSD daily for a long time.
Yeah.
A lot.
Right.
I think she's the one that's best to speak to it because she's been around the longest and has like, this lived experience. In the absence of an actual clinical study of some kind. Yeah. Like we have to kind of rely on the people who've been around for ages to like advise.
Yeah. And so if maybe it does come out that there is a risk there, then maybe like a novel tweak on psilocybin that doesn't do that would be good. A lot of people cite the idea of creating a shorter acting tryptamine being like the parent molecule of like psilocybin and DMT and stuff. Because like busy parents don't have 6 hours to trip on psilocybin at a clinic, which is like true on the one hand, but I don't
sad
know.
On the other.
It's sad on the other. And it's also like, if you want a shorter acting tryptamine, like, have you heard of DMT? I don't know that we need to invent something new.
Right.
So I don't know. And I have invested in companies that are doing novel molecules. I'm still bullish on them. I think that the ones that we've invested in are doing like kind of interesting things that are not just let's tweak one tiny thing on psilocybin and call it a new molecule. I just had a really interesting podcast recorded with Sam Bannister. Do you know who that is?
Not yet.
He's this like kind of genius medicinal chemist who is from Australia. He's been on Hamilton Morris's podcast, and most of his academic career was spent looking at novel cannabinoids. And
cool.
He was, as an academic, he's of course publishing his research, right? And he didn't know that this was happening, but like these underground chemists were looking at his research and just like making the shit that he was describing. And I think one of his compounds ended up being like the most commonly produced like synthetic cannabinoid, like some crazy thing like that. Yeah, they talk about it in depth on the Hamilton Morris podcast if you're a subscriber to his Patreon. But anyway, so he's got a company in Australia that is just getting started up, and they're taking an opposite approach. They're not just starting with like psilocybin and LSD and like tweaking it slightly. They're literally going for like entire new molecular shapes that could hit the 5-HT2A, receptor and everything. So I think that kind of research is like interesting to do just for the sake of doing it, right? But you see all these companies, we were talking earlier about these sketchy Canadian companies, and a lot of them are just making the slightest modifications to these molecules, calling them something new, sending out a bunch of press releases, raising money from investors. And like, is that this bullshit thing started by this random company going to replace psilocybin? Like, I don't think so. So, yeah.
Before we leave the heart thing, like, this implication of that certain receptor site, was it 5-HT2B or something?
5-HT2B is the one that causes the heart problems.
So this got a lot of publicity around fen-phen when athletes were having heart attacks, but the pure quantity they were consuming on a very regular basis, that to me is so different from like the pure quantity of psilocybin or LSD someone's consuming.
Yeah.
And like, if you just do apples to apples, you're like, okay, like if I was consuming 3 grams of LSD daily for years, yeah, maybe. Mm-hmm.
Right. And
but you're going to have other problems.
Yeah. So most likely it's if someone is like a big time microdoser, right? Which I don't think we've really
like a macrodoser that if the internal effect appears like a microdose, you get like 500 micrograms and you're not feeling it anymore.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, that one thing we certainly don't have is like data around long-term microdosing, you know?
Yeah.
Even I think, well, I don't know. I guess a lot of the guys in the 60s probably did macrodoses daily, but
it was a big deal back then like that. But you know, we could theoretically recruit a whole bunch of people that lived on Haight-Ashbury. Like,
sure,
if we got a 900 person sample set and do a bunch of heart imaging, and then we have the data. It's like,
yeah, we could.
Have you consumed more than 700 hits of LSD? Yes, please sign up for my study.
Can we check out your heart?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's easy.
Right.
You know, universities have funding.
Yeah, they do. That is true. Although, you know, I have a feeling that those Haight-Ashbury people probably consumed lots of other drugs that might have,
sure.
The data may be a little dirty. Is what
do you know about the
say.
Mormon study that was done ages and ages ago?
No.
So get this. This is a big deal, and it was a study that turned the tide on MDMA safety. Mm. So like, you know, right around the time Oprah kind of blew up that whole thing, the fraudulent study where they were feeding like massive amounts of methamphetamine to rats, claiming it was MDMA.
Right.
Like, you know, they were fraudulent in reporting what they dosed and their dosages. And they say, hey, look, like holes in the brain. It's like, fuck, like, come on. And, you know, Oprah was putting it all over the place. My mom panic called me, Joe, are you on ecstasy? I'm like, I just got to college. No, actually, like I didn't even, like, I think that was even before I started smoking weed, which is kind of crazy. Funny. And I'm like, no, Mom, I just like drinking a lot of water. Yeah, this is fine. And, you know, that was a big push against, you know, that was like one of the final pushes in the drug war back then, like 2001-ish. You know, there's plenty more after that, but, you know, fentanyl didn't come on stage front and center for like another decade, really, I don't think.
Yeah.
But
as predicted by
yeah, right. Picard, thank you. Yeah. And so the Mormon thing, there's no explicit references in Book of Mormon, the Bible, etc., about certain substances like alcohol, basic intoxication, obviously banned. MDMA was novel. It's created by man.
Right.
And Mormon kids wanted to do raves too. So there was this whole cohort of people in Utah who were raving purely on MDMA, which is actually super rare to do like mono drug partying. Most people are doing polydrug partying. So I think at a certain point, somebody from that community reached out to like a MAPS or like a research group to say, hey, like we got this whole cohort here. You want to check us out? Like we're happy to submit to like some research. And it showed, you know, no substantial impact on their health. So that was a really big push in, you know, for MAPS. Like MAPS had this data and they said, hey, look, MDMA is super safe. We have this single drug cohort over here.
That's insane. I had no idea. Wow.
This is one of the magic tricks MAPS
I also
pulls.
didn't know that Mormons were that cool.
It can be. I lived in Utah and I left Utah, both for a reason.
The MDMA ran out or what?
Man, at a certain point, I'm like actually happy I didn't find drugs till later. Because I probably would have made more mistakes. But I did pretty good.
Same.
Yeah. But yeah, like, what was it? I think there was a hot spring that the Utah government actually blew up because hippies were going there naked.
Jesus Christ.
Yeah. I'm like, nope, I'm out. Yeah. And then there was like, I think mining in like a place that to me was 20 minutes from the city. It was like one of the most beautiful places on earth. And they were mining the granite. I'm like, no, y'all got to think about that a little more.
Yeah.
If you want to be acceptable to mass culture a little bit more, but they don't necessarily want to be acceptable to mass culture. Yeah. Though there's some really interesting new developments there, but we don't need to get into that now.
Well, I haven't seen any pitch decks from like Mormon founders yet, but you know, it wouldn't surprise me.
Reed Robinson at Novamind, like I don't know his background, but they're in Utah. I think, did they just sell to somebody? I think they might have done a really big partnership with Numinous, maybe. Mm-hmm. Maybe Numinous acquired them because they had a really great clinical infrastructure there.
Yeah.
I got another Mormon story too, but yeah, like I don't know that background, but there is some really interesting novel molecule stuff, psilocybin and ketamine stuff going on in Utah, and they can be a really forward-looking people. Like I wouldn't be surprised if we see a lot more action out of Utah than we expect. Like,
yeah, well,
I'm kind of excited about that.
On high doses of mushrooms, I have felt like I was going to inherit my own planet.
Good.
If I did right. So
Good.
it kind of like
that sounds dope, right?
Yeah.
Like it's just metaverse. It's just sandboxy.
Right.
And what was the other one? No, lost it. Oh well. But there's that's what happens on 3 hours of sleep. But yeah. So in your early days, you were getting really cynical and like critical of what was going on out there. Were there any companies that went out of business that you predicted that you wouldn't mind naming?
I mean, yeah, I thought that Mind Cure wasn't going to make it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Love you, Kelsey. But yeah, I don't know. I remember just looking at the website, and there were a lot of patterns in Mind Cure that I saw repeated a lot across a lot of other companies, which was, first of all, the company doesn't have very much money in the bank, right? So they've IPO'd with like, I don't know, 10, 20, 30 million, which like sounds like a lot, but
if you're doing biotech, that's not a lot.
Yeah. And you also have to understand that once you IPO, I mean, you can continue to raise money, but that's kind of supposed to be the final thing, right? You're supposed to do like lots of private rounds before. So it's always like questionable when people IPO that quickly.
Well, they went right to IPO. They didn't do Series A, et cetera.
Well, I mean, they would do a Series A and then it's like 6 months later, I don't know the details of Mind Cure specifically.
Right.
But the things that I saw about Mind Cure that made me kind of question it was just that if you look at their pitch deck or their website, it's like, we are doing everything. We're developing a new molecule. We've got clinics. We've got like a meditation app. We've got like it's just like, we're doing everything.
So you want to see focus.
Yeah. So in business in general, like you can branch out into other things, but once you've succeeded at one thing. And I saw so many psychedelic companies that claimed that they were going to do everything while having made no progress on anything, or very, not no progress, but very little progress. Right. And to a lesser extent, and this company is still going, but like, I liked Field Trip Health a lot too, but they also had a lot of things that they were trying to do everything. Right. It's like, we've got these clinics, we're expanding very quickly. We have like a mushroom research facility in Jamaica. We're working on a novel molecule, and all those projects may pay off, right? The clinics are beautiful.
And they might have been far more successful if COVID wasn't in place.
That too. That's true as well. And like Ronan is a smart guy and everything. But yeah, in general, I think it's like when a company's starting out, you just have to do like one thing and succeed. And for all of the reasons to be cynical about biotech, in general, the biotech companies, they're like focused on like one thing, maybe like a second molecule later, but they have a very specific focus. Yeah. So that I was kind of very cynical. I immediately, of course, thought that, just like, I didn't really understand all of the different business opportunities in psychedelics. I had just been using psychedelics on my own. Like, I didn't think about like how I could make money off of this for like the past 8 years. Right. And so it took me a while to kind of like get into my head, like, oh, there's going to be these clinics and there's going to be maybe some novel molecules that are better for certain populations. And there are going to be like all these infrastructures and accessories around it. And, it's funny, like I'll probably get a lot of like hate for this, but the first company that I looked at that made me think like, oh, this is actually going to happen was Compass Pathways. Yeah. Because I saw that, first of all, they had like raised enough money to actually do what they said they were going to do. And
do you remember how much it was?
I don't remember, but I
more than 2 million.
It was
a lot actually. It was a really big amount of money.
It was a good amount. And they weren't scatterbrained. They were like, we're just taking psilocybin and we're giving it to people with treatment-resistant depression. The data seems good. We have a team with actual pharma experience. It's not just like Canadian gold miners. And,
sorry, Canada, I love you.
Yeah. And I was like, yeah, these people have a shot. And they got, I was like, I think they could actually get approved by the FDA. Ethics aside, like I was like, oh, I can see how this works. And that was when I kind of was like, wow, I think there's, maybe some real like business potential here in the psychedelics industry. And, I talked about other companies like MindMed, which I was like half bullish on and half like super critical of, because there were just like so many weird things happening with that company. But yeah, I realized that there was some real upside. And
you got to listen to my interview with JR if you haven't. It's so funny.
Yeah. Well, I do remember, I think you asked him point blank if he was for decriminalization or not. And I think he said something like, what did he say? He said,
so
he
my angle,
danced around.
There's two big arguments there. Number one was, so this was at the point when I still kind of believed that biotech was going to put money against decrim and against legalization. And he was not easy on saying, no, I'm not going to do that. But eventually he said, no, I'm not going to do that.
Yeah.
Like, obviously I'm focused on my business, but I could see like an industry lobby working against that later.
Yeah.
But then the other one, because it was LSD, and I'm like, fuck, dude, like this is the oldest molecule, like in the synthetic world,
Right.
like, you know, so I was a little bummed on that. And then we got in an argument about Xanax, which is like, okay, you got this trip stopper, dude, but like, you know, Xanax already exists and it's so cheap. But he's like, it's dangerous. I'm like, if you use it once with supervision, no, it's not.
Yeah. I've heard a lot of different companies talking about trip stoppers as a big business plan. And I don't know, dude. Like it's interesting. The thing to me, and this is just my personal like gut reaction about this, is like, in my experience, the moments immediately following when I thought I wanted the trip to stop is when like I learned the lesson or whatever. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Does that make sense? Yeah.
Yeah.
And so
for me, it's like the security blanket.
Yeah.
Have you met this woman, T Fairy, yet?
No.
You got to try. She had an epic podcast with me.
What is her name?
T Fairy. Kind of like ayahuasca fairy.
Like TEA?
Yeah.
T Fairy.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's one of the craziest, most intense, and most valuable podcasts I think I've ever done. And it was insane. So like she's talking like 200 words a minute, it felt like, but it was so value dense that I'm like, there's no way I can't cut this. But she at one point was like, you know, you're at the festival, you had the acid and you have the Xanax in your pocket just as a security blanket, but you never use it. You're just like, just in case this gets really ugly, I know it's there. It's kind of like you're hiking in the wilderness in Alaska and you have the big pistol.
Yeah.
You know, it's not going to help too much, but it's going to like give you a little bit of security.
I almost feel though that like even if you know that you have it there, that's almost like too much. I could be wrong. I've
done it both ways.
Okay.
You know, honestly, once I did have to consume Xanax, like once.
Really? Yeah.
But it was like I was at a music festival. It wasn't a good scene. It was 8 to 20 hits somewhere in there, and I'm like, yeah, you know, I've been rolling around in this like sharp dirt for 3 hours. This is probably enough. I should probably get back to my friends. And that was enough dry heaving. So like, you know, it was good to have. But I don't feel like I need it.
Yeah. And I granted, I have not, you know, if you're in a situation where you've had some extreme trauma and you're doing psychedelics for the first time under the care of a guide, like I can see the value.
There
right?
it is. Yeah, exactly that. It's like, you know, at what point are we re-traumatizing people? And that's, I think, a valid question. Because these can be really intense therapies.
Yeah.
And if we take a trauma-informed lens, we want to be really gentle when those people have like aggressive trauma histories. But
and doing
how do we figure that out?
You know, one thing that's really surprised me is like in LA, everyone you meet like has done mushrooms before, and they're probably like microdosing right now. But one thing that's kind of surprised me is that a very small percentage of people seem to have done like high doses, anything like what you do in like the Compass Pathways trial, which is equivalent to like, you know, 3.5 grams. Like even people that microdose like all the time, like, oh, I've never done more than 2 grams, or even like I've never done more than 1.5, and I don't know that I want to. And so that's kind of interesting to me. It's interesting that there are so many people that are like psychedelic friendly, but are like afraid to go like past, you know, the point of no return.
What do you think that is?
I don't know, because for me, when I started reading about psychedelics after college, I was trying to like I was like an angry internet atheist, and I was trying to figure out how to inject some like spirituality into my life without believing in Magic Sky Daddy. And I read Sam Harris's essay called Drugs and the Meaning of Life. The first thing that I thought was like, I wonder, like, I need to make sure that I like break through. Like it was like the opposite. I was like, I want to make sure I don't take too little, you know? So that just may be my personality type, but I think that there are a lot of people, especially now with like, you know, COVID and inflation and everyone's like fucked. People are like, I don't want to shake the tree of life too much, because like everything is a little bit like held together with duct tape at the moment. And there's not a big like net to catch me if things go poorly.
A line Kyle has that I love is something like, are you at a point in your life where you can handle some instability for a while?
Yeah, sure.
Some people aren't, especially when you're acutely ill. Can you handle like not knowing which way is up for a while?
Yeah.
When you have a family and like not a good amount of economic stability, like
sure,
that's questionable.
Yeah, absolutely.
But, you know, when people are resourced and, you know, have a decent enough container, like that can be okay. But, you know, like I think people are sensing that degree of instability.
Yeah. And it's hard to know too, because I did psychedelics for the first time like not too long after college. So I was in my early 20s.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, when you're like that age, it's just like, you don't really give a fuck, you know, in general. That was me. If I had somehow not been exposed to psychedelics until now I'm 31, I wonder if like 31-year-old me would be like, yeah, I don't know, bro. Like, I'm not gonna, I might have a very different approach and maybe I would, you know, understand it better. But yeah, I could see it, especially if psychedelics come to you like later in life when you have like a lot more to lose. I could see it being a concern. I don't know.
But then you look at how like kind of pop culture adores somebody like Aubrey Marcus, who like his whole persona is built on like going super far.
Yeah.
Public persona. I have no idea who he is as a person. But
have you interviewed him?
No. But, you know, like there's something appealing there. It's like the Indiana Jones thing. It's like, oh, cool. Like you really fucking went for it. I think that's why we like Tim Leary, Terrence McKenna, Sasha Shulgin, etc. These people went really fucking far. Yeah. And like, you know, maybe that's why, you know, Magellan is still a thing. And like some people still like think Columbus is cool. It's like he went really far, kind of.
This makes me think of the Alex Jones rant when he's screaming about how Magellan is cooler than Justin Bieber. I don't know if you've ever seen, it's one of the best pieces of YouTube that I've ever seen. Yeah. He's like, kids, Magellan is way cooler than Justin Bieber. He circumnavigated the globe and died. He went far, like you said. Very fun. Yeah.
Have you seen the new Mike Myers show, Pentaveret?
No.
He does a really good Alex Jones impersonation. There's a recurring character. It's so funny.
Well,
he plays like 9 or 10 characters
so
in it.
I'll check that out.
No psychedelics. But
no psychedelics. Okay. But yeah, you know, you mentioned Aubrey Marcus, and one of the things that's been kind of interesting about the industry is that there's been like this move where obviously the super like suit and tie business people try to distance themselves from like the weirdos, like the Aubrey Marcus types or the shaman bros, right?
And the Joe Morris, yeah.
Yeah. And then there are even people like that are in the middle, like even me sometimes, who I've done like tons of, you know, recreational psychedelics, and I try to be like way less uptight than a lot of the other investors, but there's still a part of me that's like, you know, maybe we should like not associate with the crazy ayahuasca people down in Costa Rica. But like the more I think about it, I'm like, maybe we should just like embrace the whole thing and do like big tent, and like everything is cool. And this whole entire industry was built on people going to the limit and pushing it. And so maybe that's just what we need to embrace to make
without
it work.
explorers, what do we have?
Right.
And like, we're in a way lying to ourselves if we don't.
Yeah. It's almost like, hey, crazy shaman people, thanks for getting us here. Now fuck off. We're kicking the ladder from underneath you, you know?
Right.
Yeah.
Like, cool neighborhood. It's ours now.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. The gentrification thing. So I think that we should probably like
how do we do that? Do you have any ideas on like how we could get people together?
Well, I don't know. The challenge is that it's just a different approach, right? When you're talking about like making a business, whether it's a biotech business or it's like developing new molecules, or a company like Compass that's trying to get this stuff approved by the FDA, you have to follow this like rigorous scientific approach. And that's like the antithesis of, you know, the way that these guys do it in a way, right? Well, maybe not, but it's they're all about like, hey man, we don't care if it's different every time. We don't care if it's placebo, if there's like expectation bias built in. We're just doing what like makes sense to us. And that, you know, I think there's a lot of value in that. The FDA doesn't really see like a lot of value in that, right? So, and I think that there is a reaction from like the you know, the ayahuasca. I keep using the word ayahuasca like it's just ayahuasca, but you know, the wild and no holds barred psychedelic people. They react they react very negatively to the idea of like trying to scientize psychedelics and even commercialize psychedelics beyond, you know, opening a retreat center in Costa Rica, basically. So I don't know how you bring people together. I think it has to be honestly more like on the responsibility of like the business people to not like ostracize that part of the community. And I think that is largely what has happened.
There's so much of a divide.
Sense. Yeah.
It's so awkward.
It's super weird.
And
what's also funny is you meet people. I've met plenty of people who have done like mushrooms tons of times, and you're like, "What do you think about Compass Pathways?" And they're like, "What is that?" Like a lot. There are so many people that have like consumed shitloads of drugs. They might even be leading like mushroom ceremonies, and they don't even know that there's like a corporate side of this happening. So yeah, the industry is definitely fragmented for sure. It would be nice if there was like less of that. It still gets me every time I see like an interview with a CEO of a psychedelics company and they're wearing a suit and tie. Like, what? Like,
It's weird, right?
It's super weird.
But it's like, a lot of these people don't come from the culture. They just like, maybe they had a personal experience. Maybe they saw the dollar signs and like they're playing the game.
Yeah.
There's other games to be played.
Yeah.
Oh shit. I had a super funny thing to do here. Nope, lost it. But, yeah, like how do we get these people together? I think, we should try. Maybe it's at a small scale. Maybe it's 4 CEOs and 4 like psychedelic legends sitting down for dinner.
Yeah, it could be fun.
Shaman bros. Like, oh my God. Yeah, it's interesting, right?
Yeah.
Like, and how do we know even if we're doing it right with like a Costa Rica retreat or something?
It's impossible to know. This is one of the things that I've been trying to think about is, you see these, let's talk about retreats and clinics and everything. Is it possible to create like a giant nationwide chain of clinics, or will it sort of end up being like, dance studios or mixed martial arts studios where people go to these specific gyms and specific locations because there's a specific teacher that does it in a specific style,
I think we're going to see a blend.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it's hard for me to imagine.
There's cost and scale savings once you have like 100 clinics. And so your margins are better. You can compete better. But if you have like a Phil Wolfson with 4 clinics, that might be a different deal.
Yeah. But I think, like just because you can scale the costs doesn't mean that you can scale like the quality. And I feel like people are going to get so attached to their guides. This is not going to be like I don't know. It seems like the psychedelic guide is not going to be an interchangeable part where it's like, oh, my old guide like moved over there. So like, whatever, I'll just do the new guide.
I'm really
now.
attached to my people.
Right.
Have you heard the line, I'm in between shamans right now? Adam Strauss used that at an event recently in San Francisco and killed me.
That's so funny. Sorry.
Like, yeah, that's the thing I heard at the coffee shop recently.
Yeah, I'm just in between shamans. The last one just like didn't really work out, and like I'm doing some
like the people I did
microdoses
ayahuasca with were like it was good, but like I'm not tied to them. But like my breathwork people, I'm really tied to because it's been years and years and years and years. And then I see how other people operate. We were kind of talking about this in terms of technique and differentiation, and like everybody thinks they're right.
Yeah.
And how do you know?
Well, this is why I think a lot of these, like obviously clinics are going to be an important part, but it's just whenever I see a company who says that they're going to be like the brand that has like the protocol that like everyone follows, to me, that just seems kind of like not crazy, but it's like, I don't know, there's got to be so much differentiation.
Have you checked out Awaken yet? It's Ben Sessa, David Nutt.
Yeah.
Like for whatever reason, like I like to get really complicated.
Okay.
What they did was the inverse. Like let's do ketamine assisted psychotherapy with CBT.
That's it.
And I'm like, it's pretty straightforward. I'm a little revolted because it's CBT and I like don't like that very much, but it's the thing with the most evidence.
Interesting. What's wrong with CBT?
I don't think it can encompass enough of what it means to be human to be like the gold standard in the future. I think it's just the most easy thing to study. Okay. Because it's like a straightforward protocol.
Yeah.
Whereas if you get into the more humanistic approaches of psychotherapy, which I'm more aligned with, like that is literally resistant to research.
What would be an example of like the more humanistic approaches?
Rogerian.
Okay.
Jungian, biosynthesis, somatic techniques, probably like, almost even IFS, but IFS is almost at the point of like being so popular that you could almost call it evidence-based. Maybe you can.
Okay.
I have a lot of problems with that term too.
Evidence-based?
Yeah. It's so obnoxious. It's so obnoxious because it's like,
it does sound a little pretentious, right? When you say it, it's like, this is the evidence-based approach.
Oh my God. It kills me. Like if you ever have like a doctor friend fresh out of med school and they're like, oh yeah, no, this is the evidence-based method. Like, but it's like the human body is much more complicated than that. Science is really young.
Yeah.
Like there's so much we don't know yet. And maybe that brings us back to this logical positivism thing that I wrote down that I wanted to say earlier.
Oh,
so
yeah, there it is.
Do you know what logical positivism is?
Tell me about logical positivism.
Thank you for saying it better than I can. So it effectively is like the stream of philosophy that people like Dawkins inherited. It goes back to people like Bertrand Russell, like the early famous mathematician who worked with Alfred North Whitehead to develop like mathematical theory to the point where they said, this is fucking impossible to figure out. So they tried really hard to make a complete theory of mathematics and like logic, failed. Okay. And they tried really hard and they're smartest dudes in math in that period of
They
time.
They tried to make basically a unified theory
of mathematics,
math instead of physics
and logic, and that like abstracts down, and that would later apply to physics. Mm-hmm. So it's like you have the fundamentals, and then you can go forward. So logical positivism, Jesus, is effectively saying the only meaningful things you can discuss are things from science in like really good articles. So like, it's not meaningful to discuss much. And if you want to have a meaningful conversation, like human experience, for instance, has minimal value relative to a clinical trial.
Sure.
And how do you juxtapose those two things? Like human experience is pretty valuable, but clinical science is also pretty valuable.
Yeah, well, and every idea for a clinical trial comes from a human experience generally, especially when
it gets whittled down to a number.
Stuff, right? It gets whittled down to a number.
How much pain are you in?
You always like lose some resolution when you try to collapse things to a single number or even a set of numbers.
And I bet if you and I sat down and like critiqued a couple scientific papers, you could see where I'm going with this. It's like there's so many philosophical issues and like easy philosophical critiques when you look at papers.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
And, scientists don't necessarily see that because they're scientists. They're not necessarily have any philosophy training. And like, I think scientists could benefit tremendously from philosophical training.
They could. And this is, so
maybe science goes further.
When you talk about like the sort of the bifurcation between the FDA approved psychedelics world and then sort of the Oregon Measure 109 psychedelics world, which I know you follow this a lot more closely than I do. So correct me if I'm wrong, but in Oregon, they're not going to make it so that you have to be like diagnosed with depression, right? You can just say, I want to be guided basically, and they will do it.
It's like pretty much supported adult use.
Okay. Yeah. So that is
wild. I love it.
Yeah. No, it's great. And that allows for you to sort of like break out of the diagnostic code box and just open yourself up to like whatever experience you want to have.
Right. Like if a spectrum is like infinitely divisible, what do diagnostic categories in the DSM actually mean? And have you read any books like critiquing DSM yet?
I've not read any complete books, but I've read
it would be worth it.
Yeah, I've read plenty of critiques.
There's a few articles by, I think the guy who is leading the project around DSM-4 wrote a book critiquing the whole process and how unscientific it is. So once we understand how unscientific DSM is, and theoretically people in this logical positivist frame would be in support of that when they see how unscientific it is, but because of the AMA and all the rules around licensure and everything, you kind of have to fall in line as a clinician.
Yeah.
Otherwise you could lose your license, credibility, et cetera. And it's a slippery slope.
The DSM itself is basically created in sort of like this Council of Nicaea way, right? Don't they just kind of like sit around and they're like, well, I guess we'll add this one. And
it was such a political process.
Right.
It was minimal science. And, the good news is like many of us are really paranoid that a lot of pharma dollars went into influencing it.
Yep.
And his position is that no, in fact, it wasn't really that at all.
Interesting.
There was maybe a couple things, but like large, like maybe 2 drugs total out of like all the drugs we have.
Yeah.
Although it's pretty good.
Yeah. And well, now of course, though, pharma has tied itself so much to those diagnostic criteria that now there's sort of like
it's a weird cabal.
Two, right. Yeah. Yeah. But now like one of my sort of predictions, and I don't know how confident I am in this prediction, but I'm leaning like more towards it than against it, is that like 10 years from now, psychedelic use is going to look much more like Oregon Measure 109 than like you go to the doctor and get like your Compass Pathways version of psilocybin. Not that both won't exist to some extent, but I feel like at least in, the fun states, California, Washington, Oregon, Colorado, like I feel like there's going to be the fun, expensive states.
Sorry, everybody.
Yeah. It feels like, assuming something horrific doesn't happen with Oregon Measure 109, similar legislation is going to pop up very quickly in other states. It already is.
States have to compete.
Right.
I'm told by some people in the know that the legalization initiative in Colorado will pass.
Yeah.
Based on some polling data. And I am
and isn't that
concerned and excited.
Isn't that even more broad than 109?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think largely all plant psychedelics probably except peyote.
Right. And it's not just decriminalized either, right? It's like
legalized,
actual
straight up legal.
Fucking insane, dude.
And I think it's more liberal than Oregon. I don't know that they had things in there around training.
Really?
Which is
that might be a problem, but
we'll see.
Yeah. I mean, so I think that, and this is kind of like, not to make this all about the investing stuff, but I'm friends with, all the people that manage a lot of the other psychedelic funds. They're all great and they're super smart. But when I see these funds that are focused purely on biotech, I'm like, guys, do you not understand that there's a lot of other stuff happening and
mushrooms exist.
Yeah, mushrooms have existed for a long time. What's more likely, that people will continue using psychedelics in a manner similar to how they've been used before, or the paradigm is going to totally flip and everything is going to go through insurance companies and everything is going to be run through a DSM-5 diagnostic code. I think it's much more the first thing that I said, where we will continue to use these things kind of similar to how we've always used them, which is, yeah. So I don't know. And this is why I'm so interested in investing in some of these non-biotech stuff, just because got to hedge against the 109 risk, right? And this is also why I don't want to invest in any of these companies that are basically at risk from decriminalization. One, because I don't want them to pull a JR on and use their position to speak out against it. But also I think that any attempts to speak out against it are ultimately failed. I think it's happening whether you want it to or not. So yeah.
So did you see Zeus's post about the DMT vape cart recently with the wildly beautiful packaging?
Dude, it looked sick. I want to get one.
What was your immediate reaction when you saw the packaging?
I was upset that no one had given me one for free yet as a psychedelic influencer.
I've received surprisingly few drugs in my 6 years of podcasting, so get used to it.
Yeah, but for those who don't know, so Zeus he's a neuroscientist that writes
Zeus
for Double
Tapato.
Blind. Yeah.
He wrote for us a little bit. I want to hire him more. He writes for Double Blind, a few other sites. He's about to start a PhD in Maastricht, DMT
Amsterdam.
and VR.
Yeah, kind of crazy, but very interesting. But yeah, he tweeted a picture of this. It looked like it came from the Apple store. It was a hybrid between Versace and Apple that made this.
It was so high design.
It looked so intense. Yeah. And it was just a DMT vape cartridge. And yeah.
How do you sell something that costs $10 for 200?
Right.
Packaging and branding, exactly. Right? And there is power in brands. I just started recently understanding the power to change minds through brands recently.
Yeah.
And I was chatting with somebody who's been developing beautiful consumer packaged goods, psychedelics, since 2016 or 17. And I'm like, you're really forward thinking in that, number one, you saw that there was going to be an increasing demand. You saw that people wanted to trust a package that had the label on it, that, know, really consistent thing, ordered to your door because it's New York probably. And, what... I think there's a massive amount of power there, because what happens when cops start confiscating all this stuff? They start getting confused. They're like, wait, this looks way cooler. This is cooler looking than any wine bottle I've ever seen. What is this thing? And, you took it from some wealthy people. So the cops are going to start getting a little confused.
Yeah. Well, I've seen this too with the whole mushroom chocolate bar scene here in LA.
There's so many.
And at the beginning, I would see these chocolate bars and it would usually just say mushroom chocolate, and it would say lion's mane or whatever, and then this, if you knew, you would know that there was psilocybin in there. Now I'm starting to see them that straight up say 3.5 grams of psilocybin mushrooms on the fucking
Sometimes
label.
love the strain.
Yeah, it'll tell you. And I do think you're right that there are probably a good chunk of the LAPD that if they saw that would be oh, well, the package looks sick. It's got a barcode on the back. It must be legal, right? It's no one even knows. So yeah, it is interesting. We were talking about the company Schedule 35.
Oh yeah, thanks for bringing that in.
Yeah, it was a very similar subject here.
You're saying that's on Mike Tyson's podcast?
Dude, yeah. So I found out about it because I've recently been binging Hotboxing with Mike Tyson because it's an amazing piece of modern philosophy, I think.
Thank God.
And
we got to dig into that more later.
Dude, you got to check it out. It's insane. Hearing Mike Tyson read ads is very funny, but he'll read an ad for a VPN and tell you why you need a VPN. It's priceless.
You need a VPN, people. I don't have any to sell you, but you need one.
Yeah. And so I'm listening to this podcast with Mike Tyson. I wish I could remember what episode it was, but I just hear him. He's like, I love psilocybin or whatever. And he's like, you got to buy from Schedule 35. And I'm like, what the fuck? I look up Schedule 35 and it's a company that is selling mushroom tablets, microdose tablets online, shipped to the US and Canada. I think they're based in Canada, but they're fully out there. You don't have to pay in crypto. You can pay with your credit card. And they have an Instagram page with 40,000 followers. They've got a TikTok page with these crazy high production value commercials and shit. And I mean, they say that they're shipping from a location where it's decriminalized, but like, I'm sure it's still not like legal for them to actually be producing on that level.
Crossing federal lines.
Shipping from Canada into the US.
Do you think they are Canadian?
I think so. Yeah. It sounded like they were.
Makes more sense, but it's still risky.
Yeah.
DEA has a big reach.
They do. Yeah. And I've heard people say that like psychedelic prosecution is not like their highest priority, which is probably true, but that doesn't mean that it's not something that they would do, you know?
I recorded with somebody last week who was arrested right before the laws went into place in DC.
Yeah.
And they only had a small amount of mushrooms, and they got raided by 5 people with machine guns from different federal agencies in front of a 6-year-old girl and a like 70-year-old woman. And he got hauled off for 48 hours in solitary. Like for something, you know, they misidentified San Pedro as peyote. And like, fuck that. Like, I don't trust these people. I heard in this whole like decrim thing from the same guy, like about 13 arrests happened to like prove a point that the feds are still here.
Well, this is what's so crazy. This is what I don't get, because like on the one hand you have that, and then on the other hand you have like Mike Tyson getting paid probably like 20 grand to talk about buying psilocybin online, and like nothing seems to happen. You know what I mean? It's very weird. I don't know. I don't know what to make of it. What's funny is after I tweeted about Schedule 35, just talking about how crazy it is that these people are doing this. Like 5 minutes later, I got like a DM from some guy that was like, hey, you know, and I looked at this dude's LinkedIn. He was like a legit like business guy. He's like, I'd love to like start a company like Schedule 35. Like, do you know someone I should talk to? I'm like, no. Like, what
it's not really part of my thesis here.
I was like, I think you should probably like talk to a lawyer.
Yeah, let's start there. Yeah, like everybody, talk to more lawyers. And I've started to meet some lawyers who I have some doubts about. So like maybe talk to a few lawyers.
Yeah, you got to kind of like triangulate the truth, right?
Yeah.
There are certain lawyers that are like,
I mean, yes man or no man.
Sure. Like I'll find a way to make it happen.
Which is like attractive, but it's also scary.
Yeah. But people are bold about it. You know, there are all these like websites and startup. I see a lot of pitch decks for these companies that are like, we're going to be the directory to find a psychedelic guide. Like, so you can go on here and you can just search for like a psychedelic guide in your area.
For underground people too.
Well, like they're all underground people at this point, right?
Largely,
and and so I'm like, dude, this is just like the cops can just look at this, you know, right? Like, I don't know. I don't really understand how people are so bold about it. It's crazy.
It's because you manifest it,
I guess.
I can appreciate that a little bit, but I'm also like, you know, jail's not fun, people.
No, it's not.
I know people that have been in jail for a long time, and you know, it's not great.
Yeah,
and I'm not going to do well there, so I try to be very legal.
No, same.
No.
Yeah. But the thing is that the people that take those risks, like Schedule 35 at this point has a brand, and when, you know, Denver like opens up, like they might be the first people there.
Totally. It could be like a cookies play. Like,
yeah. Have you done any research into the size of the market in like the Netherlands? Like, do we know how much money worth of those truffles is sold? This is something I've done a little bit of digging to try to find it, and the estimates range.
There's 2 major manufacturers, right? But I don't even know who they are and how much they're doing.
I don't know. I would love to know, because it seems like that would be the best way to proxy like how big the psychedelic industry in the US could get, right? You just multiply it by the population ratio.
It's tough though, because like we're far more friendly to drugs than like the Dutch culture is. Like I think largely people in Amsterdam and Netherlands are not that interested. I think it's largely tourists.
Really?
Like they're really reserved people.
So
I think that's my impression. I could be wrong, everybody. And I'm sorry.
Europeans in general seem to be like more, you know, reserved than Americans, but I mean, the country also has legalized psychedelics, so they can't be that reserved. I don't know.
Yeah, it's I don't know. I'll do some field research. I'm going to be there for the ICPR conference, and we're doing a retreat over there in September. So I'll report back.
Yeah, I went last year and it was fun. I took these truffles that were called something like Hawaiian. They're like the chill Hawaiians, and they were very intense.
Were they truffles or mushrooms?
They were truffles. Yeah, I think the mushrooms are not legal.
How was your flavor?
It's a little nutty, you know.
Someone told me it was like pecans or something. I'm like,
yeah,
I could probably tolerate that.
I didn't.
I always thought it was disgusting.
I have no problem eating mushrooms. They're fine. I don't need them in a chocolate bar. Just choke them down.
You hear that, everybody?
Yeah.
Bold.
Have you seen that video?
I hate eating mushrooms.
No, I think they're fine. Have you seen that video of Mike? This is also on Mike Tyson's podcast, where he literally like grabs a handful of mushrooms and just shoves them in his mouth.
No way.
Yeah, probably like 5 grams worth of mushrooms.
Good for him.
Yeah, it's pretty. And he's like, he continues to talk while chewing. And the guy's like, dude, can you like drink some water so you're not like coughing up these mushrooms?
Out, man. That's so crazy, but good.
Yeah.
It's probably really helped his brain health, honestly.
Probably,
but like,
yeah.
he's probably got some serious issues in there. But he seems relatively healthy these days.
Yeah, it was interesting that he was like the keynote speaker at Wonderland last year. It's like,
did you watch it? I didn't even go to the keynote.
I was backstage right before because I went out right afterwards, so I didn't see it. But I'm sure it was interesting, talking about him doing the toad.
Yeah, I'm gonna have a conversation with Mike Tyson, I think, pretty soon about him saying that word, because I'm really worried about the ecological impact and like how people just don't even think about the ecological.
Yeah,
yeah,
they don't. I was just looking to see if I
MMA. I want to see what that MMA note
I was
is.
talking about like the MMA. Is it going to be closer to like MMA gyms versus like the grand scheme? Yeah. Well, this is obviously like one of the questions around like the ethics and impact. Like, are you producing these things in a sustainable way? The toad, obviously, everyone knows. Hamilton Morris has talked about this many, many times.
The toad population is going to go away.
Yeah. Don't fuck up the toads, guys.
Yeah.
Synthesize that shit.
And it's so cheap synthetically. And there is research that shows this subjective experience is 100%. Almost no different.
Yeah. Well, and this is part of the
and dosing's
challenge.
Way better.
Yeah. When we were talking about like bringing together, the hippies plus like the more science or business minded people, this is one of the things that it seems like the hippie folks have a very hard time accepting, is that you can synthesize something and it's the same as.
And the hippies aren't understanding environmental issues. Like, come on.
Well, the spiritual awakening is more important than the environmental, right? If Mother Nature didn't give us, if Mother Nature didn't want us to have the toad, she wouldn't have given us the toad.
You can always manifest another planet, I guess.
You can always manifest another planet. It's true. I had a very, on the subject of manifesting, I had a really funny conversation with this person a couple of weeks. This was like right at the beginning of the Ukraine thing. And this girl was talking about how much she's gotten better at manifesting recently and how it's like, helped her life in all these different ways. Mm-hmm. And I was just like, I can't handle all these, all this manifesting talk. And I think my face kind of said it. And she was like, what? You seem like you disagree. And I was like, yeah, I just don't really get the manifesting. Like, what about like these kids in Ukraine right now that are getting their houses like blown up? Are they just like not manifesting hard enough or what? And she like got real quiet for like 30 seconds. Then she goes, I think Putin's just better at manifesting than they are. I was like,
my God.
She was like,
she could be right.
Yeah. And then I thought about it. I was like, she actually probably is right. Cause Putin,
he's got some pretty good training.
Putin has been thinking about Ukraine for like 30 years, probably even longer. Right. That's been his sole focus. He's like, I'm going to get it back. He manifested that shit.
My favorite part is like, I don't even understand the conflict. Like I understand there's some gnarly shit, but I'm like, why?
Yeah.
Oil pipelines. That's like my usual line, but I have no idea.
It was you that was telling me that Ukraine has like legal ibogaine ceremonies. Mescaline. Okay.
And I don't know about ceremonies. Like I don't actually know what the like the culture is around it for whatever reason. I just don't think it's scheduled in Ukraine. Yeah. Can't wait. I think Finland has legal ibogaine.
Really?
Like just not scheduled.
Yeah. Well, that's one of the companies that I invested in. Beyond has a clinic in Mexico that they just opened the doors, I think at the end of March. And they saw, I think, 22 patients the first month or something like that. And they've started to release like some testimonials on YouTube of people that went down there that were, addicted to heroin, did a flood dose of ibogaine. Now they feel like their cravings for opiates have been eliminated. And it's interesting, man. I'm super curious to see like, what like a year from now, like how effective. Do you know anyone
skeptical
who's like
on Mexico?
Well, of course, skeptical on Mexico.
I have a story for you after that.
We can't do it in the US, right?
Totally.
So, but have you met anyone that's used ibogaine to get off of opiates?
5 people maybe total.
Okay.
Yeah. But it's, the efficacy is huge.
Works, right? Yeah. It seems like it works.
Like, and the number one thing it does every time is eliminates the physical cravings. It's not necessarily like you're cured from one session.
Right.
Like that requires community, therapy, like probably a few sessions.
But at least the chemical dependency or like the
right, which is one of the hardest parts.
Yeah, that's the part that.
But then you go home to your, shitty environment. Like, what's to stop you from using again?
Right.
So one thing I like is this one guy I met ages ago was saying he treats people, but he refuses to treat them at their home. They have to go at least like 3 gas tanks of miles away from home. So they can't just like freak out and go, I need to use tomorrow.
Yeah.
Or you need to use tonight and I can be home tonight.
Totally, man. That is one of the this is one of the challenges with like the telehealth model too. Like all these companies that are shipping ketamine to people's homes. Like obviously there are a lot of upsides to it if you don't have a clinic that you can go to. But yeah, it's tough to like break out of your routine when you're in,
Did you post that image of the koala the other day? It was like me and Diego posted it. It was, so like this, it was this koala holding onto a tree in a cartoon, but the whole forest was cut down.
Oh, fuck.
And like, let's give him mushrooms. He'll be better.
He'll be fine.
But there's a lot about culture and the way we live our lives in our built environments, like that are not great for the human organism. And like in a lot of ways, we've built a really broken environment and a broken culture. And like, until we fix some big aspects of culture, people are still going to be really sick. Like, I have to go, I'm really lucky because my commute's an hour and 45 minutes. And like, maybe sometimes I have 3 minutes to go get food and eat it in front of my desk.
Oh my God.
And like, like these, if you want to take a really dark look at culture, it's a big deal. There's this reggae artist, Linton Kwesi Johnson, wrote an amazing song, England is a Bitch.
Okay.
And it talked about going from Jamaica to work in England and like how horrible it was.
Right.
And like, this was probably in the 70s. And it's like, Jamaica's a tropical paradise and you go to England, you're like, I haven't seen the sun in 9 months.
Yeah. Well, there's a reason the British people were such vicious conquerors. They were trying to get the fuck out of that cold, wet rock.
I love you, England, too. But yeah, like it was some environmental issues that made it kind of dark there, and cultural imperial issues too. Yeah. And like how do we get through that? It's going to take a lot of revisioning and a lot of time. Like this is not an easy problem.
No, this is why people are so stoked about psychedelics. What do you think? I know that you've launched the training program recently. Mm-hmm. And we were just talking about how in Colorado, there's maybe not even going to be any training requirements. Like a very common thing that I'm
not positive on that, but
maybe, right? It's who knows. But one of the common things that it seems like everyone in the psychedelics world agrees on, from the hippies to the science people to the business people, is that you got to have like a guide that knows what the fuck they're doing, right? But the reality is that most people that have done psychedelics have not done it with a guide that knows what they're doing, right? Like my first 100 trips were not with the guide that knew what they were doing. Right. They were like solo guided or friend guided. Do you think that like even this idea that we need to have guides and that is that like a real thing? Or do you think that
depends on context and and the human in the mix, right? Yeah. Like
imagine
if you're Tom Cruise, you probably need a guide.
Do you?
Tom Cruise probably. Yeah. He's got some baggage probably.
Does Tom Cruise need a guide to drink or smoke? Like
it depends, but it depends on dose. It depends on like reason. Like, I want to eat some acid at Burning Man. Like, do I need a guide?
Yeah.
Like it's a different deal.
Right.
And like, for some people it's too intense. For some people it's kind of a walk in the park. I think there's different neurotypes for people. I think there's different like physiology where things metabolize differently. Mm-hmm. And different psyche sets. Like we come in with different baggage. So like, some people can eat a 10 strip of acid and it's fine. It's not me. I don't do well on a 10 strip, but it's
part of me just wonders if obviously there's a benefit to having guides, and I'm not saying you shouldn't have a guide, but like there's saying that
how much safety do you want?
Well, it's how much safety do you want, but the fact that this is being repeated by like almost every person in the industry makes me feel like the importance of guides may be being overstated for the sake of maintaining control and profit, right? That's something that
let's keep it in a profitable container, because $3 acid at Walmart, it's going to be a problem for this burgeoning industry. Mm-hmm.
And when you look
have you seen me tweet at Walmart? Like, hey, Walmart,
I don't
like,
think I've seen you tweet at Walmart now.
My line is, I'm ready to buy some acid now. So my line that I've been trying to like brand a little bit and like repeat over and over is like, I'm not done until I'm buying acid without a prescription at Walmart.
There you go. Yeah.
And like that's
right next
aggressive
to the, right next to the guns.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. So
they stopped selling the cool stuff, but whatever.
So yeah, with the guide thing, and this is maybe one of the other challenges that like people, when they think about the future of the industry, I saw some survey about, I think it was just in an Oregon, like how much are you willing to pay for a guide? Did you see
What'd you
that
see?
survey?
No, I don't know if I saw that.
Yeah, I did not
$20.
I did not look at the methodology. Could be totally wrong, right? But it was low. It was like, 100, 200, $300 for like a full guided psilocybin session, which if you know anything about psilocybin, this means at least an hour or two before for prep, 6 hours during, and then some aftercare. Like that is not enough for the guide is not going to be making any real money doing that. Right. So you're not going to have like,
can't even pay rent with that kind of stuff.
Right.
Yeah.
Especially in Oregon. So when you see the stuff I was talking about before, it really just does make me wonder, like,
we're establishing a new beachhead.
How big is this guide thing really going to be?
It's a really good question. Like I'm like, most of my psychedelic, I've had maybe 2 total guided sessions.
Yeah.
Maybe. Mm-hmm. And the rest of it is like, having the most fun ever, or like running around the woods or whatever it is. And like, can that be repeated? Is that what people think it is? Like when people think ayahuasca, they don't think like, I'm going to fuck around and go to Coachella. They're like, I'm going to lay down, I'm going to be puking. There's probably going to be an expert there to take care of me. Yeah, and I'm going to be not moving. Ketamine, you're in Los Angeles, you're in the heart of like ketamine country. And this is like, it's a weird drug because you do too much, you're out for an hour and like vulnerable as shit.
And I also wonder, like, people of course want to go to the trusted professionals and everything, but I also think that for people that maybe haven't done psychedelics before, they might be more comfortable doing it with someone that they know and not some random guide. Like I was telling you before we started the podcast, my mom recently did mushrooms for the first time. And, when she had told me that she wanted to try it, I was like, yeah, we could probably find like a person near where you live that would like do it. And she's like, oh no, if I want to do it, I'm doing it with you. Like she doesn't want to do it with someone that she doesn't know that she's paying, right? Makes sense. Wants to do it with someone that she knows personally.
I get that a lot, by the way, but I just don't do it. I'm like, nah.
Yeah, I generally don't do it either. But this, you can make exceptions for mom. I am not a psychedelic guide, people. But the point is that like how many other people have that same attitude that she has, which is like, if I do it, I want to do it with like someone I know, not like this random person who, I threw $200 to, and now they're like giving it to me. I don't know. So I think the guide thing is $2,500
to $5,000 a session. But if we look at the market in San Francisco, like that's the baseline, $2,500 to $5,000 for a day. Yeah. And that's usually part of a longer scope of work.
But that's obviously serving the top 1% of people.
Well, San Francisco to start with, and then like, right? Bay Area, like they're interested, they have a lot of resources. So that's kind of what the market is. So a lot of guides from elsewhere are like moving there. Like, I guess I'm just going to get an apartment there because I can pay for that with 1 session a month. And then like, it's just gravy on top of that. And, which is pretty wild. Yeah. I don't know how I feel about it, but if people are doing it consensually, whatever. That's kind of the problem though, is like we're in this conversation, we don't want to be prescriptive. It seems like we're like exploring what are people up to. Yeah. Like what do they actually want? I know a lot of people on both sides are going to say exactly what people want, but I don't think anybody has the right answer here.
Well, I think that people should be able to go to a guide if they want to. I'm not saying like it's bad, but this idea
like, what is the market size?
The idea that it has to be done through a guide, otherwise it's like dangerous. I think that's kind of like spreading fear mongering.
Who started it?
I don't know. I don't know.
In pop culture, it's Pollan.
Is it Michael Pollan?
Yeah, in pop
culture. I have
culture.
not read his book, by the way.
Fascinating.
I know everyone that has gotten into psychedelics in the past 3 years that's over the age of 40 has gotten into it because of that book, but I have not.
I pulled an eye muscle from rolling my eyes too hard. Like when the 100th person told me that's what got them interested.
Yeah, have you heard of How to Change Your Mind? Oh, dude, you would love it.
Like I read it right away. Like as soon as it came out, I read it within a day or two. And I'm like, okay, cool. This is going to change the psychedelic world. I need to be ready. Yeah. But it's also like, the alternate title is like My Psychedelic Summer Vacation. Like, look at me, I'm a rich white man. Like I can do all this cool stuff with money and influence. Like, why don't you? Except no, you shouldn't, because it's illegal and you're a bad person if you break the law. Right. Yeah. And especially if you do it outside of the way he's describing. Like,
is he very like
kind of like, I'm a little annoyed with him. I'm thankful for the book, but I'm also annoyed at it. Yeah. And I'm annoyed, like, it's kind of like a cultural ballast, like kind of like holding us in a certain narrative, similar to like the MAPS narrative and like these other kind of clinical narratives. It's like cool, it's helpful, but it's like, there's so many different ways of using, and there's so many different ways of knowing what's right and wrong.
And you know, the thing that's, I think, extra frustrating about it is that a lot of the people that talk about how important it is to do psychedelics like in the right way, if you actually get to know them, you know that that's not what they actually like.
Totally.
believe,
It's
right?
a cultural persona.
Yeah.
Like I try to shoot straight from the hip because I barely have a dog in the fight because I don't have a biotech company, but
Yeah. And
maybe I will someday.
I saw this up close at Wonderland last year, where like every speaker is talking about how, you know, clinical setting, trained professional, blah, blah, blah. And literally at the after parties, like the same people are like, yo, you want to hit this DMT vape? So yeah,
it's so ridiculous, isn't it? It's like double speaking.
I get that you have to have like two faces.
If you're in biotech, you have to shoot straight like that because the FDA is going to eat you alive if you don't. And the DEA is going to pull your license. So like, you know, you're playing games inside of Empire, but saying things outside of school. That's like,
which is fine. I mean, it
playing the game.
They're playing the game. They're doing what they have to do, and it just is what it is. Yeah, makes sense.
But it takes us to like, you know, we have to tell the truth, and like, you know, maybe I've eaten mushrooms alone.
Right.
Oh my God,
crazy! What?
Put him in jail. Like, but you know, 5 grams in silent darkness is quite the meme.
Yeah, it is for a reason. Have you done it?
No, you?
Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
It was the one time that I did psilocybin where I had a crushing headache afterwards. Yeah. I usually feel amazing afterwards. I felt like I was going to die afterwards.
Oh my God.
But it was still like, I still felt good, but I was like, my head is just throbbing. I feel like my brain has had like surgery done on it. It was just like pulsating. And it was one of the first times that I ever did psychedelics where I don't remember most of it. I just feel like I was just I remember I was laughing my ass off, like on the come up, like, and to the point where I was like, my neighbors must be able to hear me. Like I am just like cackling like a maniac.
Dumb and Dumber on repeat.
Yeah.
Huh?
And then I just feel like I just got sucked into like somewhere. And then like, I remember at one point getting up to like go pee and then just went back. And then all of a sudden I was like, I'm done. I was like, I don't remember any of this.
Wow.
Yeah. And it wasn't bad. I don't remember having anything bad. I remember rolling around. I remember laughing and just a lot of like white light. But yeah, I feel like there's like a threshold where, I don't know, people talk about doing the 5 grams and like, you know, I think Sam Harris had this thing where he said his 5 gram of mushroom experience involved a jaguar. And I think his exact phrase was, he wasn't raped by the jaguar, but they're not exactly on platonic terms or something like that. Like, I don't know, some weird thing like that. I didn't see any jaguars. I didn't communicate with any aliens, nothing. It was just white light. That was it. That was all that was there.
It's not bad.
I don't know.
It's not bad.
Could have been worse.
Yeah. It's, so like investment wise, like this whole business landscape, it's strange as hell. It's early.
It's early.
Like we don't really have a successful case study to point to yet.
No.
Like if we want to compare ourselves to cannabis, cool, but it's a very different deal as of right now.
It still is super different. And I hope it stays super different.
I think it will. I think like, well, maybe. Like if there was a psychedelic consumable that I could use daily, similar to cannabis, like I might be into that, but you know, not all day, like maybe in place of a wine. Yeah. But like, you know, we'll see.
Yeah. Well, the interesting thing is that I think the first like legal revenues will come from Oregon, likely starting in early 2023, right?
How do you consider that? Like it is legal at the state level.
At the state level, yeah.
But the feds aren't cracking down as far as we can tell.
Yeah, that's going to be a tough one.
Are we calling it legal? It's like it's kind of legal.
State legal.
It's state legal.
I mean, it's legal at the state level.
Yeah.
And then the next legal thing outside of like Oregon and Denver type legislation is going to be MAPS' MDMA, which is also not through like a for-profit company, right?
Do you think MAPS is going to be Compass to market?
Yeah.
Cool.
I mean, it's almost certain, I think, because they're just further along in the trials. They already completed one of their phase 3s.
Right.
And their second phase 3, the confirmation study, is like fully enrolled and has been approved already to go forward. Compass has not even started their phase 3 unless I could be mistaken about that, but I don't think they have.
I think you're right.
Yeah. So MAPS, which is a nonprofit that started a public benefits corporation that is wholly owned by the nonprofit and didn't sell any equity in order to raise money. They did this weird like revenue sharing agreement. They're going to be the first to like the FDA legal market, most likely, which if you went to Horizon's conference, like half of the conference at the business day was about like alternative structures, like alternative forms of capitalism, alternative business structures to
Is Bennett Zellner there?
I think so. Yeah. And I think it's interesting, man. It may be the case that the bulk of the money in the psychedelics industry gets made through these types of weird nonprofits, religious organizations, and maybe one or two of the biotechs will make a ton of money, but the rest of them will fail. And people that are trying to like profit greatly off of psychedelics in a purely traditional capitalist way will fail, which has happened in cannabis to a large degree, right? Like very few companies really made money in cannabis.
There's a lot of acquisition. There was a lot of bankruptcies probably and people closing shop. But
the nice thing about where we are now being in this sort of like crash is that it's making the money's a lot harder to get, which means that if you want to get money, you have to be much more serious and legit. And I think we've kind of seen the end of these like bullshitty, scamish, half scam, half real companies. I think that's mostly over, which is good.
So if somebody's trying to invest like, $5,000 or something, do you have any kind of like skepticism to impart to them for their decision-making at all? Not being financial advice?
Not being financial advice. I mean, if you're investing, in the public markets, and I said at the beginning, I'll say it again, like I'll get a lot of hate for this, but the companies that are the most likely to make money are the companies that a lot of people like to hate on because for various ethical reasons, which are totally understandable. Compass Pathways, Atai Life Sciences, a lot of these other, and I haven't stayed on top of these. I'm trying to interview Christian Angermayer. So I'm hoping that, have you interviewed him? I'm trying to get him to do shrooms with me. It's not going to happen, but
interesting.
That would be my dream, is to just like get him to do mushrooms on the podcast.
You like it weird. That's fascinating.
But yeah, you have to just be real about does the company have enough money in the bank to, meet its goals? Very few of them do. And understand that it's a long time horizon. Yeah.
Really long time horizon, really right? I think average is probably, if you complete it, probably 8, 9, 10 years maybe.
Well, Compass Pathways, assuming everything works out, probably will get approval in 2025 because they're already through their phase 2.
When did they start getting a little notable? Was that right around 16, 17?
2016? When?
2016, 2017.
I think it was later than that. They didn't IPO until the end of 2020.
Okay.
And I think before
all those like crazy drama stories in the past, right?
A little bit. So I know that they started as a nonprofit, right? Didn't they?
Yeah.
They started as a nonprofit.
American nonprofit.
And then I think they realized correctly, by the way, that they were going to have a very hard time raising money as a nonprofit. And so, or I don't know, tell me.
Unless that was not their play at all. Because I was a little dubious about it, but then I talked to a bunch of people and they're like, no, that's legal. But I think perhaps the strategy was, I'm a nonprofit. I'm going to go like milk everybody for data for free because we're a nonprofit. Ooh. And then let's flip it over to an Isle of Man corporation, like a weird tax shelter in Britain. Sell all the nonprofit's assets to this for-profit over there in kind of like a underhanded way. And perhaps that was deliberate and by design. So like, I believe in, the worst of people most of the time.
Yeah.
But, like it's yet to be really discovered. But, they really did hurt a lot of people's feelings when they gave all that stuff for free, hoping it was going to be, widely accessible, open sourcey.
And what is that? Have they basically closed it all off? Are they not?
They don't like to talk about it.
Okay, interesting.
That's like Compass does very little, like Georgian Katerina.
Ekaterina, yeah.
Ekaterina. Like they do very little media, probably rightfully so, because people don't seem to like them very much.
Yeah.
Like I went to meet Delic in Vegas right before Wonderland, and they were on the bill, like they were going to be speaking. It was just a video.
Really?
Like, come on, guys.
Wow.
Delic did that with a few people, and I was really disappointed.
They couldn't even handle the in-person.
Like, Jason Sylvia is going to be here. Oh, cool. A video of Jason Sylvia. Like, fucking neat. Like, come on, guys. Like, this is a conference that we paid money for. But, they paid me sponsorship dollars, so I had to wait a year to complain.
Okay. That is very interesting. And there's certainly probably like some murky past to that. Wouldn't surprise. And of course, I didn't really start paying attention to them until they IPO'd. And then we saw the earliest drama.
The complainers came right to me. So like, we have to tell this story. I'm like, maybe I don't have any money for lawyers, guys. Right.
And of course there was the nonsense about like, we're patenting the trip room and like the soft music and the colors of paint on the wall and everything. Still do. I think I'm gonna interview someone from there at some point, and I'll ask them about that. Although it's been a while, so it's maybe not top of mind. But dude, despite all that bullshit, this is like similar to when we were talking on our last podcast about like how Joe Rogan has moved the industry forward, whether you like him or not. I think the same can be said for Compass Pathways. Like they have significantly
100%, no doubt,
moved the industry forward.
Same with Michael Pollan.
The fact that they got a psychedelics company to go straight from private to the NASDAQ, where like real institutional investors are now being made aware of the fact that like there is money to be made in psychedelics, that this is a real thing. This is not just Burning Man anymore.
And Ty made a big difference like that too. You know, love him or hate him, like big deal.
Yeah. And so that it, like we were talking earlier about bringing everyone together. This is like the Bernie Sanders Big Tent thing. It really does take like the entire spectrum of humanity to like make this shit happen. And so they have been, you know, leaders in that. So
we're fighting a $1 trillion drug war.
Yeah.
Many deaths, many incarcerations, many lives ruined. And this is part of that fight against the drug war. And, you know, like it or hate it, like this is how it's playing out.
Dude, it is. Yeah. And if you have to pick between like the continuation of the drug war and the dominance of the DEA versus like Compass Pathways doing some shady stuff, like I'll take Compass, you know what I mean?
It's really hard to make LSD and psilocybin more illegal. And from here, it should only be less illegal, theoretically.
I agree, man.
Unless, you know... RIAA police start coming in and enforcing drug stuff around copyright infringement. You know, it's like a Napster joke, everybody, if you're old enough for that. But, you know, yeah, like the, who's the psychedelic Lars Ulrich? Oh my God. Question. Watch out for it, everybody. I don't know who that is, but that's an interesting question. Like, I want to have relationships with these people. I exchanged a few emails with Ekaterina, who knows? Katerina at Compass.
No,
and
not
like,
S-ketamine, S-ketamine.
like, I want to have a relationship with these people, but I'm also like, how do I? I'm a journalist. So it's like, you know, well, am I a journalist? I play one on the internet. Like, I don't really think of myself as one, more of a critic. And, you know, how can I have an authentic conversation with these people when I have like pretty deep critiques?
Yeah, I don't know. It's a good question. I mean, you can have an honest conversation. It's just a matter of, are they willing to have an honest conversation back? And I think that like in time, all of these people are going to have to like
take a few more years,
answer the questions. And they have to some extent, not fully.
I told you about that internal memo, right?
Yeah. Remind me, remind everyone listening.
Well, you're welcome, everybody, in advance, but there's an internal memo from Angermayer. I think he wrote it to shareholders or to like the team members inside the company. Yeah. Saying they will win because they will have a de facto IP monopoly. Yeah. And like they were just convinced, and they're using like, you know, pretty sophisticated IP tools. What do they call it? Thicket. Like you have an IP thicket around like your actual core business. So you just can't get at it. And if you look at software, like, cause that's where I came from, software, Apple and Samsung and like these big phone manufacturers just suing each other non-stop. And like, where's the value for your investors in doing that? Or is it just, you've made this game, now you have to fight this battle. You're obligated to fight that IP battle.
Well, I think what they're going to realize is that their business is not just against other pharmaceutical companies. Like we talked about, it's against like the Measure 109 shit, which you can't.
The UDV and Sanodime and all the shamans in South America.
And the guy with the warehouse that's growing mushrooms and selling it to these like, you know, therapists in Oregon or whatever, which their IP will not, you can't stop someone from growing mushrooms, right? If like the state allows you to.
It's going to be really hard.
Yeah. And same thing with like, you can't stop someone from like synthesizing LSD or whatever if you're in a regime where that's allowed. So I think that they may realize eventually that like this IP stuff may be helpful for them to achieve like dominance in the pharma space, but it's not going to prevent people from growing their own mushrooms, people from seeking decriminalized care under Measure 109 or Denver. And they're going to, it's going to be, again, like this has kind of been a thing I've touched on over the course of the whole podcast. Just there's this like, people are just kind of being willfully ignorant of how big this like non-FDA market for psychedelics is going to be, I think. And maybe, you know, the people at Atai think that they can stop it by lobbying or something, but I don't think they think they can do that. Like it's, the people are going to speak and the people want shrooms.
So like on one hand, I do think we will see some sort of multi-trillion-dollar psychedelic industry. I don't know what it's going to look like. It's going to be weird as hell. I mean, it's going to be a mix of biotech and, you know, other means. I don't think the market's going to be as I don't know. This is an interesting question. Like, I want to compare cannabis a little bit,
Yeah.
but it's like, with cannabis, you have the different strains, you have different ways of growing, you have different geographies, different, what do they call it? Terroir in the soil, like with wines, like you have different kind of like, this is the Javanese, like, Thai stick or whatever it is. And like, there's a really interesting story and brand you can tell there. And like, can you really do that with mushrooms?
Well, people are already doing it
They're
with all the
trying.
different strains. They're like,
Totally.
do you want the penis envy or the albino Avery or like the golden teachers?
What does Hamilton say? Like a cubensis is a cubensis unless it's penis envy.
Right. Is that what he says? I didn't know that.
Like penis envy is like the only strain, like cultivar, that's like a little bit different.
Huh.
That's primarily what I eat. So like, I don't know anymore.
Well,
I only eat caviar.
It does seem like most of that strain stuff is bullshit, right?
There's interesting stuff like psilocybin cup. Have you seen that yet?
Psilocybin cup,
like a cannabis cup, psilocybin cup. So they actually test, like growers submit strains and test for potency.
I didn't know that.
I think that's pretty interesting.
Well, potency is sure. There's going to be different potency, but in terms of like, this is a different effect because it's got like the entourage.
Like in Netherlands, they have like this much on the visuals, this much on the body.
Shut
like
up.
I find that ridiculous.
It's absurd. But the thing about psychedelics is that we're talking about multiple drugs here. Cannabis is just a single drug, right? So
right, like are we going to see the LSD? I'm like, I don't know. Like when I'm buying it at Walmart, like equate LSD, like that's going to be a little weird.
The equate LSD, I mean, that might be some good shit. You don't know.
25 micrograms per pill.
I think it'll be interesting if we ever get to the point where people are able to legally produce and sell like a lot of the like Shulgin compounds. Like will you be able to get 2CB made and like
that's interesting. So like the varieties are the strains. So like we have this huge pharmacopoeia and that becomes the strain.
Yeah. And is the Denver situation, is that just plant medicine?
I don't think we're going to see synthetics in Colorado for a while.
Sorry, Colorado.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, at some point, I think people understand that like LSD and ketamine and MDMA, these are all like good things in addition to the plants. So that means we should allow like an organ measure 109 of synthetics. And that would allow like the whole entire like P-call, T-call library to be made available.
One of the guys leading the charge on the Colorado legalization initiative called me at one point and explained everything that was going on. I'm like, I had no idea. Thank you for calling me. My only complaint is that LSD is not on here.
Yeah.
I'm like, well, I'm like, okay, cool, whatever. It'll come in time, but it's like, it's just not part of the popular narrative right now. Like, and I'm like, what the fuck's wrong with LSD? The fuck is wrong with LSD? It's pretty fucking cool.
It's not a plant, dude. It doesn't have the spirit of the plant.
Therefore, the DEA is okay to arrest me. Like, sweet, and put me away for 20 years. Cool. Like, this is the psychedelic exceptionalism thing that's like racist and a bit tone deaf, and people need to hear that.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Well, even within, it's like we have the plant exceptionalism, and that's like within psychedelics, and then there's the psychedelics versus all the other drugs too. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, this is something that people probably should talk about more. But yeah, dude, I think that like psychedelics are certainly healthier for you than certain drugs. But does that make you a better person for doing them versus like someone that does coke or something? Like I don't think so.
Like say you're like the world's top 3 human rights advocates, and like you've saved millions of lives, but you're addicted to cocaine.
Yeah.
Are you worse person than somebody that only uses ayahuasca on the weekends and works for Apple?
Well, how do you think you got all the energy to save all those lives? It's from the coke.
Never done cocaine. Sorry, everybody, for disappointing you. Like, what are some of your favorite like for-profits and nonprofits right now? Like
in terms of
2 of each.
Yeah. Well, I mean, nonprofits, obviously MAPS. I don't really know. I've heard a lot of interesting things about the USONA Institute. Mm-hmm. I haven't like dug into it.
We'll get into that once the microphone's off.
Yes, please. I'm so excited. In terms of the for-profit stuff, I guess this is the time where I get to shill the companies I've invested in. So, some of the most interesting. I like the weird stuff. So I told you earlier about the company Wave.
Eating mushrooms.
It's my life goal. I need to be like one of those Make-A-Wish kids. Like, please, I want to do mushrooms with Christian Angermayer. It's my deathbed desire. It's on my ego deathbed. I want to be next to Christian Angermayer. So WavePaths does music for psychedelic therapy. You might hear that and think, okay, it's like a Spotify playlist.
We've got a podcast with him. Have you had him on yours?
Yeah.
Yeah, cool.
It's crazy. So that's an example. Have you listened to WavePaths?
I blew it. I had the opportunity to get the software and everything, and I was like, oh, I'm busy. But no, I haven't even tried it yet.
I'll show you later.
Cool.
It's fun. Yeah.
And the therapist can kind of DJ a little bit.
They can DJ a lot. So there's like, it's generative music, which means that you can adjust how it sounds. So there's like these 4 different sort of emotional knobs.
There's like NFT art.
Yeah, it's like there's calm, there's intensity, there's like bittersweet and vigor. And if the patient is freaking out, the trip sitter can like turn up the calm knob and the music seamlessly gets more calm. And what they plan to do is they want to incorporate like biofeedback. So like your Apple Watch or like the Whoop strap that you're wearing might like sense that you're freaking out and the music just gets calm all of a sudden, which, very sci-fi. Who knows how well it'll work, but I like the vision, right? And the music is
if we look 10 years out, it's going to go great. But if like, 3 years, maybe not.
Yeah. Our mutual friend, Juan Pablo, CEO and founder of New Life, they are probably the leading like at-home ketamine provider.
Have they partnered yet?
They're partnered with Field Trip.
Okay.
Yeah.
Not Wave Paths. Okay.
Not Wave Paths. No, they have their own music in the app. Maybe they'll do some partnership at some point. But yeah, they're trying to do the at-home ketamine stuff the right way, ethically, not just being pill pushers like a lot of these people are, which is good. And yeah, I mean, there's an interesting company that I just invested in called Canna Health, which just
Kanna.
Kanna, like the canna plant. Are you familiar with canna?
I had it recently, and it was twice recently. It's kind of interesting. I wasn't sure what to make of it. Maybe my dose was weird.
Yeah. Well, part of the problem with canna is that we were talking about how different mushrooms have different levels of potency.
Wait a second. We talked about this canna stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, we won't go there too far.
We can't talk about that part. But the company is basically creating like, novel drugs based off of the canna plant, which I think is interesting.
Is it pharmacologically quite complex in the plant?
The plant itself, I think, has 4 different alkaloids that are psychoactive. Okay. So you can isolate them, and then you can also like tweak them to make like new chemical entities and stuff. But I think this is one of as the psychedelics industry gets saturated and people realize that you can't just make like a mushroom company anymore, we're going to start to see a shift into like these other like psychoactive plants, canna being one of them. For those who don't know, people say that if you take enough canna, it feels like a natural MDMA. Pharmacologically, it functions sort of like an SSRI. It like blocks serotonin reuptake. It's my understanding. So yeah, I'm, willing to look like outside of the realm of like pure psychedelics to get into, some of these weirder plants. Unfortunately, if you spend enough time looking at all of the different weird psychoactive plants, the lesson that you'll learn is that any fungus that makes you trip does so because it has psilocybin in it, and any plant that makes you trip does so because it has DMT in it. There are very few like plants that have some new chemical in them. But yeah, man, there's a lot of cool stuff out there.
Have you got a copy of the book Synergetic and Dennis McKenna did together, like ESPD 50? Have you heard of it?
I have. Yeah. I think when
every psychoactive plant.
Yeah. Well, I have like an encyclopedia of every psychoactive plant, and
hell yeah.
That is the thing there. It's like, you're like, and then you read the footnote. It's like, it has psilocybin in it or DMT. And you're like, fuck. I'm just like, when are you going to show me the new thing? Yeah.
We need more Shulgins out there.
Yeah, seriously.
We talked about Dr. Z, right?
No. Tell me about Dr. Z.
All right. I need to know more about Dr. Z. This might be speculative, maybe. Yeah. I've not talked or met Dr. Z, but ostensibly the whole framework is like novel molecules, testing in a small pilot group, himself included. If it's a winner, immediate research chemical that gets mass manufactured and distributed. Like I'm not 100% on this.
Is he raising money?
I'm in. I'm in. I
this
find
is a real guy, or
I believe so. I hope I'm not getting anybody in trouble here. But
it sounds like a Bond villain.
Sounds sick, right? Please be my friend. But yeah, like there are people out there doing the Shulgin thing.
Yeah.
Yeah,
absolutely.
I might have to cancel his name out.
Yeah. Doctor. Boop.
Yeah. Cancel name. But yeah, like this is a really interesting phenomenon. And I think there's a lot of value in continuing that like Shulgin push.
Yeah.
And, Hamilton's now working for Compass and like manufacturing many new molecules a week.
Yeah. And I won't name any names obviously, but like when you're creating a new molecule, obviously the FDA says you have to put it in rats for weeks, if not months, to make sure it doesn't kill them, blah, blah, blah. And then maybe some other animals, and then eventually in humans. And like you might do all that, and it turns out that the trip is like horrible and not even like pleasant, right? So it's a big waste of time.
Why not save your company millions and
just do it on yourself, which of course is illegal, and no company would ever admit to doing that. I have had conversations with, companies that are at the early stage, and they're like, hey man, here's the deal. Like we're trying this shit on ourselves, right? Like, don't tell anyone.
It's called skin in the game.
Skin in the game, yeah. And so it's hard to say like, And even when they say that, who knows if they're even doing it, right? They could just be saying that because they know that I'm a guy who would like be like, oh, that's cool if I heard that. Like, yeah, who knows? But it's an interesting idea. This is not how normal research is done, but this is kind of its own weird little corner of the biotech universe.
Have you heard this idea or term, other ways of knowing?
Yeah, I have.
Yeah. Like it came on my radar in my undergrad. There was somebody who was like flirting on the lines of like women's studies. And there was this one topic, like a woman's way of knowing, which is like, that was the first time I heard it. And then I was like, wait a second. Is this idea bigger? Like, are there other ways of knowing other than like logical positivist type, like thinking? And I think there is like direct experience, and sometimes things speak to you. And you know, what do we make of that? Like, we don't know what to do with that.
Sure.
In the same way, like current scientists, like fresh-ish PhDs don't know what to do with science from the 50s and 60s. Like that doesn't fit into my frame. It's like, well, LSD was the most studied drug ever for a long time.
Yeah. Yeah. There were like over 1,000 papers.
I don't know what to do with that. Yeah. It's like, quit being a wimp. Like, you know, have a little bit of a spine and say, hey, there's a lot of clinical data here. What do we do with it?
Yeah.
Learn what to do with it. And say, I don't know what to do with it. I don't know how to use this iPhone. I'm out.
Right. Dude, sometimes you got to tap into those other ways of knowing.
But what is it? Eating
LSD? That would be a good name for a podcast. Other ways of knowing. Might be a good new one. If you're going to start a new podcast, yeah.
Write it down. Other ways, like anyways, that's kind of cool. Yeah, man. Anything else you want to shout out? I don't even know. Dude,
I think this has been, this is probably pretty long. But this has been amazing, man. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Empath Ventures.
Empath.vc on Twitter at The Real Brom. We're still raising money. So if you're interested in, investing in the psychedelics world, hit me up.
Accredited investors only.
Accredited investors only. That is, accredited investors only. And, check out my podcast, which is currently called The Integration Conversation. Who knows how much longer it'll be called that, but you'll be able to find it.
Hell yeah.
Yeah. Thanks, Joe.
Brom, thanks a lot. This is awesome.
Boom.
And there you have it. Brom Rector, Empath Ventures. Hope y'all liked this one. I really had a great time spending time in person with Brom and getting to know him a little bit better in person in Los Angeles. We've hung out mostly in Miami in the past, and really good to spend, more time just getting to know folks in the field. Some really cool stuff Brom's working on. So definitely follow Empath Ventures. You get clued into some interesting businesses and research projects that are getting incubated. Brom's got a great sense of humor. So definitely also check out the podcast. All right, everybody. I think that's it for now. Joe Moore signing off for Psychedelics today. We'll see you on the next episode. Bye-bye.